Bueno, genial, ahí se va uniendo la gente. Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a la última clase del curso de Tether. Muchas gracias por estar participando. Bueno, les voy a comentar un poquito cómo va a ser la dinámica del día de hoy, en lo que se termina de unir el resto de la gente. Básicamente va a ser una dinámica muy similar a la que ya están acostumbrados del resto de las clases. En primer lugar, vamos a tener como oradora a Kamanus, ¿bien? Nos va a estar acompañando el día de hoy en esta última clase. Obviamente su parte de la presentación va a ser en español. Aquellas personas que no hablen inglés, bueno, esto los alegrará. Y después, por otra parte, tenemos a Macías, ¿sí? Ya de la parte de Tether, que nos va a estar dando su parte de la exposición y de la charla. Su parte sí ya en inglés, pero obviamente, como les dijimos en el resto de las clases, no se preocupen, porque una vez terminado este curso, y el paquete de clases, van a recibir absolutamente todo con los subtítulos ya traducidos, el contenido traducido, y obviamente todas aquellas personas que se queden hasta el final van a poder acceder a esa certificación, como les dijimos desde el principio, avalada tanto por Tether como por NW. Bien, así que bueno, sin mucho más que aclarar, Manu, si te parece, todo tuyo.
Voy para adelante, ya estoy.
Dale, todo pelota.
¿Cómo están, chicos? Un gustazo, los saludo a todos. Miren, les hago una breve intro para que sepan quién sois. Mi nombre es Manuel Terrones Godoy, pero se me conoce como Camanus88. Tengo un canal de YouTube, soy creador de contenido, soy youtuber. También tengo una plataforma de inversión llamada Bipsi, que manejamos fondos, básicamente, e invertimos en proyectos Web3. Y también fundador de T2, que es una guild, que básicamente es un grupo comunitario dedicado a cripto y Web3. Ahora, esto está, digamos, por temario enfocado en aprender lo que implica la tecnología Web3 en los juegos. Pero me gusta profundizar un poco más porque es más que eso. Empecemos hablando de la tecnología Web3 aplicada. ¿Qué beneficios trae? Y después hablamos de los juegos si quieren. Pero empecemos por lo que es aplicado. Miren, saben que todo arranca con Bitcoin. Ya habrán visto en otras clases en qué consiste Bitcoin, les habrán explicado. Pero Bitcoin, miren, para definirlo de una forma, es, es la respuesta natural del mercado al fracaso y estafa de los bancos centrales. Es eso. O sea, si lo tengo que definir, es eso. ¿Y por qué motivo lo defino así? Porque a medida que fue avanzando el tiempo, no teníamos por ahí las capacidades para desarrollar dinero descentralizado. Hasta que en 2008, después de la crisis, aparece el white paper de Bitcoin. Y lo que hace este white paper es devolverle a la gente, o sea, democratizar las finanzas. Democratizar y darle a la gente otra vez, porque no sé si lo sabían, pero el dinero es un invento privado. Eso no sé si lo sabían, pero es así. Y le devuelve el dinero a la gente, este poder que lo había perdido. Para que algo sea dinero, para que algo sea moneda, tiene que poder usarse para intercambios, tiene que tener la facultad de ser unidad de cuenta, o sea que las cosas estén expresadas en esa unidad. En Argentina la unidad de cuenta hoy es peso, por ejemplo. Y en tercer lugar, ser reserva de valor. Esas son las tres propuestas que hace Satoshi Nakamoto. Nadie sabe si es una persona, una entidad, pero puntualmente esta es la propuesta que hace. Dice, para, en lugar de tener un lugar central y que este lugar central se dedique a emitir dinero, que sea con reglas preestablecidas y de forma descentralizada. Lo que consiguió con esta propuesta fue revolucionario. Poca gente entiende la magnitud de lo que implica Bitcoin. Ahora vamos a evolucionar a hablar de Web3, tecnología y todo, pero arranca acá, ¿sí? Empieza por este lado. ¿Y saben por qué es importante? Miren, la verdad que hay un montón de modelos, lo vamos a simplificar en un modelo que se comprende muchísimo, y es que si yo soy un productor de televisores y el de enfrente es un productor de tomates, ¿cuántos cajones de tomates me tiene que dar para sacar un televisor? Imagínense si soy Lamborghini o soy Ferrari. Pero me tiene que dar la verdad que, no sé, un supermercado entero de tomates para que intercambiarlo por un Lamborghini. Sería inviable, porque a la persona que vende Lamborghinis no le interesa tener un mercado central de tomates, le interesa comerse una ensalada. Entonces no hay mercado, no hay match. Lo que termina pasando es que inventan el dinero y el dinero lo usan como un intermediario. Entonces, todos nos interesa este producto llamado dinero este dinero tiene que estar respaldado por la producción y ahí todo funciona, ¿no? Porque al final sí tenemos algo intermedio que todos queremos y es portable. Va muy bien, salvo por el hecho de que si este dinero empieza a inventarse del aire, empieza a crearse de la nada, no pierde su facultad de ser intercambiado por un producto real. Y saben que la economía son los productos reales, no es el dinero. El dinero es un instrumento de intercambio que utilizamos. Y acá viene el problema. Cuando empiezas a emitir y emitir y emitir, lo que estás haciendo es robarle producto de su trabajo a la gente. Y el trabajo implica tiempo, le estás robando tiempo, que es lo único que no podemos recuperar. No voy a profundizar más porque no es el motivo de esta charla, pero lo detallo, doy esta breve intro para que comprendan que si se puede descentralizar lo más centralizado del mundo, lo que más protegen los gobernantes y las élites, que es el dinero, se puede descentralizar todo. O sea, realmente, si somos capaces de descentralizar dinero, ¿por qué no usamos esta tecnología y vemos cómo se podría convertir en otra cosa? Ahí aparece otra persona llamada Vitalik Buterin, que crea Ethereum, y con Ethereum la gran propuesta de valor que trae son los smart contracts. La capacidad de programar, digamos, aplicaciones de forma descentralizada también. Imagínense en aquel momento cuando todavía no había sido la ICO de Ethereum, o sea que no existía Ether como token, ya Vitalik hablaba de la, él lo decía, los sistemas computacionales descentralizados. Así lo definió. Después vino los smart contracts y toda la otra movida. Pero, ¿qué implica esto? Que nosotros podríamos usar esta misma tecnología que está dividida, que está distribuida, que no está centralizada, para correr programas. Programas que entonces nos devuelvan otras facultades. Y acá surge el término Web3. Y voy a parar otro segundo para explicarles qué es Web3. Bueno, antes de Web 1, o sea, antes de Internet, de cualquier tipo de Internet, todo era analógico. Por ejemplo, si tenías que hacer un trabajo para la facultad, a mí no me tocó por mi edad, pero por ahí mis padres tenían que ir a la biblioteca a buscar un libro. A mí me tocó algo llamado Encarta. Encarta, una enciclopedia, por ahí algunos la conocen. El Encarta, entrabas unos CDs y tenías ahí todo, toda la información, por supuesto que era información hipercentralizada, o sea, todos usamos lo mismo. El docente iba y leía el mismo trabajo práctico 42 veces, porque todos nos sacábamos información del mismo lugar. Y ahí aparece Internet, que es la web 1. Fíjense que ahí lo primero que empieza a suceder es que empieza a democratizarse la información, porque ya no tengo una sola fuente, tengo múltiples fuentes. Eso está muy interesante porque me permite a mí elegir de dónde consumir. Ahora, tiene sus restricciones también, porque aunque hay múltiples fuentes, la dirección es única, es de los creadores hacia el consumidor. Entonces, avanzando un poquito más, llegamos a la web 2. Y la web 2 dice, ese camino que inventamos con la web 1 está muy bueno. Está bueno que tengamos la viabilidad, la posibilidad de acceder a información que está en Internet. Pero también podemos ser productores y podemos crear contenido. Podemos nosotros proveer información y entonces convertir en dos sentidos el canal de la información. Este es el momento en el que nacen las redes sociales, WhatsApp, todo lo que conocemos hoy. De hecho, el mundo en el que vivimos hoy, esto que estamos haciendo ahora, este entorno de Zoom en el cual estamos hablando, es Web 2. Acá yo soy consumidor y soy productor. Ustedes en este momento son consumidores, pero mañana en sus propios trabajos van, lo utilizan para ser productores. Entonces, empezamos a tener esta capacidad de comunicarnos. Así como se democratizó la información, la Web 2 democratiza la comunicación. No sé si se habrán dado cuenta que empiezan a tener en muchos aspectos más peso las redes sociales que la propia televisión. La televisión es un canal de Web 1 en cierto aspecto. Es una sola dirección. Y ahora tenemos doble. YouTube, redes sociales, nos permite crear, ser productores y consumidores. Pero acá, en todo este digamos, mundo que parecía completo, no lo era, porque nos faltaba la propiedad digital. No la teníamos. A ver, yo soy youtuber, les dije, ¿no? Y ya llevo 8 años que toda mi vida la tengo apoyada digitalmente. todos mis productos, todo lo que saco es digital. Es 100% digital, pero nada es mío. La verdad es que YouTube tiene todas las facultades para cerrar mi canal de YouTube en 5 minutos si no le gusta lo que hago. Lo puede hacer. Yo no soy propietario de nada. El dueño es YouTube. Tengo derecho de uso, es verdad, pero no soy el dueño. YouTube me puede censurar como quiera, cuando quiera, de la forma que quiera. La propiedad digital como tal no existe. ¿Por qué? No está descentralizada, porque todo corre de forma centralizada y las decisiones son completamente centralizadas. ¿Qué pasa si aplicamos esta novedad de Bitcoin que modificó un poco y trajo una innovación Vitalik con Ethereum para generar sistemas que sí corran de esta manera? Y que no esté todo montado, porque eso es lo que está pasando ahora, no esté todo montado en Amazon Web Services, que no esté todo montado en un servidor centralizado, sino que se pueda hacer de una forma distribuida. Bueno, ahí comienza la etapa inicial de la Web 3, que lo que nos devuelve y nos democratiza es la propiedad digital. Nos permite tenerla de forma genuina. Está todavía la etapa 3 en una edad incipiente, está empezando. De hecho, les hablé de, estaría bueno no montar todo en servidores centralizados como Amazon. Bueno, todavía está montado en 4 proveedores. Todavía realmente no está implementado al 100%. ¿Sí? No lo está. Está implementándose, pero también ahí vemos una oportunidad. Porque saben que cuando todo está funcionando y ya todo el mundo lo entiende y todo el mundo lo usa, ya es tarde. O sea, ya es tarde. Claro, el negocio de las redes sociales en Web 2 es multimillonario. Son todos billionaires los que hicieron redes sociales. Pero hace una hora salí a competir. Como que es tarde. Tenías que darte cuenta al principio de la Web 2. Bueno, estamos al principio de la Web 3. Cuando sea natural y nadie lo discuta y todo se comprenda y cada empresa lo tenga ejecutado, ya es tarde. O sea, ya está. Ya están los nuevos billionaires, los nuevos empresarios, los nuevos fundadores. Entonces es muy importante comprender las cosas a tiempo. Esto abre un montón de oportunidades, porque fíjense que cómo lo implementamos, ¿no? ¿Cómo podría llegar a funcionar? Bueno, ahí es a donde surgen los juegos como una posibilidad. La verdad es que los juegos se habla mucho del gaming y se habla mucho de cómo va a ser la principal ventana de adopción, no por nada, más digamos, por la simpleza. La verdad es que ese es el motivo. Finanzas descentralizadas, DeFi, no lo usa nadie. No es simple. ¿Y saben por qué no es simple? Porque las finanzas centralizadas, lo que pueden aprender, por ejemplo, lo que aprenden en NW, tampoco es fácil. Las finanzas no son fáciles para nadie. Pero los juegos sí. Al final del día el juego es un producto que cualquiera juega. O sea, lo bajás en el celular, estás un ratito, jugás una partida de Clash Royale, lo cerrás, te haces una de League of Legends, un counter con los chicos. Todos juegan. De hecho, todos en serio, ¿eh? Estadísticamente el 70% de la gente juega. Solamente que por eso son juegos casuales. Pero gamers es el 70% del mundo. Entonces tenés una ventana de ingreso muy sencilla. Si vos agarrás y metés tecnología Web 3 en un juego, estás generando adopción de una forma completamente amigable. Y acá viene la problemática. Porque ¿cómo hacemos para nosotros meter economía en un juego? Hubieron intentos en 2021 y casi todos formaron burbujas que estallaron. Porque la verdad es que para, para meterlo de una forma adecuada y correcta implicaría intercambiar tu tiempo por valor, igual que el trabajo. Lo que haces cuando vas a trabajar es cambiar tu tiempo por dinero. Entonces, ¿cómo sería esto? Si yo estoy jugando a un videojuego, jugué 8 meses, todo mi progreso me aburrió, y alguien que empieza de cero quisiera no comerse esos 8 meses, te podría comprar tu progreso. Eso podría ser desde el nivel hasta los skins, las armas, lo que vos quieras, lo podría comprar. Y le podrías pasar la propiedad real en esta compra. Esa es una forma de monetizar genuina, porque hubo energía dispuesta a crear valor, el tiempo que le dedicaste. Lo que pasa acá es que cuando uno mete criptomonedas en los juegos, empieza el problema nuevamente de la centralización, porque estas monedas le pertenecen a una empresa centralizada. Y acá surgen las problemáticas. En 2021 hubo un juego llamado Axie Infinity que sigue existiendo hoy, y Axie Infinity fue muy grande en toda América Latina, en el sudeste asiático, incluso empezó a pegar duro en Estados Unidos, y lo que hicieron fue un modelo que pretendió funcionar de esta manera, al principio lo hizo, pero después hubo demasiada demanda y poca oferta. En otras palabras, todo el mundo ingresó a farmear, a crear token dentro del juego y no alcanzó la demanda. Si vos no tenés demanda, pero tenés mucha oferta de un producto, baja de precio. Este producto era la criptomoneda y bajó de precio. Eso es el SLP, exactamente. El SLP es la moneda que sufrió esto. La verdad es que fue el primer intento, fueron los primeros que buscaron hacer algo y sí cometieron errores en el modelo económico, en la implementación. Hoy los han estado solventando. Me preguntaron en qué estado está ese juego ahora. Bueno, lo han podido revertir, han cambiado de modelo, hoy es deflacionario, tiene muchísima más demanda que nueva creación, que Flow. Pero en definitiva, se aprendió mucho de esta estructura. Porque saben que para que lo entiendan bien, una burbuja no es un mercado. Cuando dicen, este mercado es una burbuja, no. Un mercado es una cosa y una burbuja es otra. Una burbuja es un fenómeno financiero que puede suceder en un mercado. Entonces, lo que se está creando ahora es buscar un crecimiento mediante la demanda y no mediante la emisión monetaria. Fíjense que lo que termina pasando siempre, al final, es volver a los modelos de los bancos centrales. O sea, todo vuelve, sistemáticamente todo vuelve. Esto nació para escaparnos de la emisión monetaria de los bancos centrales y terminamos creando microbancos centrales en nuestras propias aplicaciones. De acá viene la importancia de constantemente buscar modelos sostenibles. Cuando ustedes vayan a intentar aprovechar las tendencias del espacio Web3, es, pero es prácticamente, miren cómo lo voy a decir, porque sí es verdad que es prácticamente indispensable que comprendan de a dónde sale el dinero, pero también que comprendan si lo que se está formando es una burbuja, porque se pueden aprovechar de la misma manera. Cuando uno es incipiente y la encuentra antes de tiempo, también la puede surfear esa burbuja, la puede aprovechar a su favor. Pero comprendan que donde hay emisión, donde hay una creación ficticia de algo y no hay demanda que lo sostenga, siempre eso termina devaluándose. ¿Y saben por qué? Porque la demanda existe. Nunca dejó de existir, por ejemplo, para este juego llamado Axie Infinity. Nunca dejó de existir. Existió durante el mercado bajista, existe hoy. Lo que hubo es un exceso de oferta. Y el motivo por el cual era muy sencillo, es porque era fácil acceder. Saben que cuando uno va en búsqueda de un emprendimiento o de crear algo, incluso en el espacio Web3, y lo menciono porque en el espacio Web3 esto es con esteroides, lo que está buscando es una oportunidad, es una ventana, una puerta abierta en el mercado o un vértice, algo que explotar que nadie más detectó. Esa es la mejor hipótesis. La otra es que sea un espacio poco competido. Esa es la otra hipótesis. Cuando es poco competido, vos tenés ahí la oportunidad de explotarlo y ganar tu pedazo del pastel. ¿Qué pasa cuando algo es demasiado sencillo? La gente ve tu modelo de negocio y lo copia, lo replica. De repente somos dos, de repente somos cuatro, de repente somos ocho. Entonces la producción crece muy rápido, pero la demanda no crece a la misma velocidad. Por ese motivo es que en general cuando la gente busca dinero fácil no lo encuentra. El dinero nunca es fácil. Puede ser rápido, pero nunca fácil. Es muy diferente. Donde es fácil, identifiquen que en ese lugar se está montando una burbuja. Si la saben identificar, la pueden explotar. Y esto lo menciono porque es algo que sistemáticamente se repite en el mundo Web3. Hay que comprender muy bien cómo funcionan estas burbujas para protegerte de lo mismo. Tampoco por acá los quiero asustar, porque Web3 no todo implica tener exposición financiera. Los juegos no implican 100% tener exposición financiera. Y acá viene la siguiente etapa del ecosistema Web3, de los juegos y de todo cómo está funcionando. Y se lo voy a poner primero en un ejemplo tradicional. Cuando usan Netflix, o Amazon, o Mercado Libre, o la empresa que ustedes quieran, para usar el producto, ¿compran la acción? La verdad que no. O sea, vos no comprás la acción de Netflix para ver Netflix. Lo que haces es contratar el servicio. Vos no comprás acciones de Amazon para el e-commerce. Lo que haces es simplemente utilizar el servicio. Eso es lo que vos haces cuando estás en una empresa tradicional. Entonces, ¿cuál es la diferencia con cripto? Que para utilizar una aplicación Web3, tenés exposición a su criptomoneda, tenés exposición a su sector financiero. En el mundo de las empresas tradicionales, uno decide si ser un consumidor o un inversor, o puede ser ambos, pero como voluntad propia. En el mundo cripto, en el mundo Web3, uno tiene siempre que utiliza un producto Web3 exposición a las criptomonedas, al mundo financiero. Y eso está mal. Porque, y de hecho está cambiando eso ahora, porque no tendría el motivo por el cual ser así. No tenés por qué generar la exposición financiera a una persona que simplemente quiere usar tu producto. Vos querés un consumidor genuino, que sea un consumidor entonces. Eso, que vaya a tu balance, que te deje dinero y que la empresa crezca. Cuando vos formas algo como lo que va ahora en el espacio Web3, que está cambiando, pero se los quiero explicar para que entiendan hacia dónde va. Está cambiando ahora, pero cuando uno pone el foco en que todos tengan mi cripto para usar mi producto, lo que estás generando inexorablemente es que todo consumidor tuyo también sea tu inversor. Cuando haya un mercado bajista, todos van a salir a vender, y ahí vemos los famosos menos 99% de todas las criptomonedas en todos los mercados bajistas. Claro que tenés menos 99%, porque el 100% de tus usuarios son tus inversores. En cambio, en el mundo tradicional, yo tengo BBVA y no soy accionista de BBVA, la verdad que no tengo una sola acción de BBVA. Soy cliente. Entonces, si mañana hay un mercado bajista y caen las acciones, yo voy a seguir siendo cliente, entonces le sigo dando profit al banco, que sigue teniendo un balance, que aunque sea chique, sigue existiendo, y evita una caída del 99%. Entonces, no es tan real que el simple hecho de que aumente la adopción va a hacer que la volatilidad baje. La volatilidad va a bajar siempre y cuando se separe el sector financiero de Web3 al sector de consumo. Y eso es lo que viene ahora. Eso es lo que vamos a encontrar en los siguientes 5 años, lo que se denomina Chain Abstraction. Vos, Web3, no tenés que saber ni qué significa. Vos tenés que usar un producto, bajarlo de la App Store y ni enterarte la capa tecnológica que hay detrás. Si tenés ganas de tener una exposición financiera a dicho producto, compras la criptomoneda, y si tenés ganas de tener dividendos, la estaqueás. Estaquear significa poner esa cripto a generarte un interés, que ese interés debe venir del profit, o sea, del ingreso real que tiene la compañía. De ahí debe venir. Entonces, para identificar en Web3, ya sea un juego, como estoy hablando ahora, o ya sea cualquier tipo de un Netflix, lo que sea, para identificar si tu ingreso es genuino o no es genuino, fíjate cómo te están pagando. Si el motivo por el cual están pagando es por creación de nueva moneda, te están devaluando en realidad. Tené cuidado que eso se va a caer. Pero te los aseguro que se va a caer. Va a durar un mes, 2 meses y se va a caer. Ahora, si te están dando un share, una participación dentro de las ganancias, entonces está modelando al sistema tradicional, pero con tecnología nueva. Eso va a funcionar. Y lo separo porque no quiere decir que no entres, que entres a una y no a la otra, que están los malos y los buenos. Simplemente hay que comprender. En todo el mundo de las inversiones, ya sean tradicionales o no, no hay malos y buenos. Está el tema de entender o no entender. Si entendés a qué estás jugando, te va a ir bien. Incluso aunque estés entrando a algo que sabés que no es sostenible a largo plazo, te va a ir bien porque lo comprendés. Vos estás llegando verdaderamente al motivo por el cual algo está subiendo. Saben que yo me dedico mucho más a este tipo de enfoque. Yo no soy como los chicos que son traders y hacen análisis técnico, sino que el mío es fundamental. Yo verdaderamente tengo otro estilo completamente distinto que se complementan igual, pero el mío está mucho más fuerte dentro de lo fundamental. ¿Qué implica esto? Implica el comprender de dónde sale el dinero para saber si algo está subvaluado o sobrevaluado. ¿Qué hace, Franco? Bienvenido. Entonces, acá tenemos los pequeños detalles para identificar qué es Web3. Web3 es propiedad descentralizada, propiedad digital. Y se puede implementar a cualquier cosa dentro de nuestra vida cotidiana. Y lo único que nos diferencia es comprender si el motivo por el cual nos genera dinero es que viene de una emisión o de un ingreso genuino. Ahí es a donde tenemos que llegar. Entonces, básicamente por acá quiero dejar lo que es la charla de Web3 y para terminar, cerrar con el motivo principal de esta conversación que son los juegos. Y hoy por hoy la verdad que es la tendencia dentro del espacio cripto, completamente. Los modelos anteriores han fracasado, los nuevos modelos lo que están haciendo es generar infraestructura. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que verdaderamente dar un ecosistema sostenido sobre esta moneda y que tengas no un juego con una moneda, sino que más bien un ecosistema de juegos que compartan la moneda y generen interés genuino. Vos no vas a conseguir la moneda solamente por jugar al videojuego, la vas a conseguir intercambiándola por tu progreso. Entonces, el progreso va a implicar esa espada que conseguiste, ese, esa armadura que conseguiste, tu guild, o sea, tu clan, tu grupo dentro del juego, pasar la propiedad a otra persona. Todo progreso, tener la capacidad de monetizarlo, porque ahí sí hay valor. Saben que los juegos tradicionales, los juegos web 2 como se les dice, les digo, League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Clash Royale, los que ustedes quieran, esos juegos tienen modelos inflacionarios. La diferencia con el juego tradicional es que se están cobrando un impuesto del 100%. El 100% del dinero que vos pones en un juego tradicional, vos te vas a llevar cero. Cero, no te comparten nada. O sea, los juegos tradicionales tienen un impuesto del 100%. Los juegos Web3 no lo tienen, porque vos podés monetizar tu tiempo. Y ahí viene la generación de riqueza. Siempre consideren que el dinero no sale del aire. Si algo tiene un valor, es porque bueno, en realidad es porque tiene demanda, vamos a ser genuinos, tiene demanda, pero se le dedicó energía para crearlo. Todo lo que tiene un valor tuvo energía para crearlo. Y ese es el punto al cual tienen que llegar. Todo lo que tiene un valor se creó con energía. Y ahí volvemos a cerrar el círculo, y este es el motivo por el cual Bitcoin tiene un valor. Solamente para que lo entiendan y cerrar, el camino original de Bitcoin se tergiversó, cambió, mutó, ya no es lo que era, perdió dos de las tres facultades con las que se creó, perdió la facultad de ser unidad de cuenta y perdió la facultad de ser una moneda de intercambio. Y el motivo es que no le han permitido escalar. ¿Esto qué quiere decir? Que como perdió la capacidad de ser unidad de cuenta y moneda de intercambio, perdió su capacidad de ser una amenaza para los bancos centrales. Como no amenaza al sistema, se forma parte del sistema. Por eso BlackRock sacó los ETFs, la SEC lo aprueba y está teniendo adopción. Es por este motivo que Bitcoin va a llegar a $1.000.000, porque ya no tiene oposición, se volvió parte. Lo que sí tiene es la reserva de valor, eso lo mantiene. Me preguntan por Big Time. Miren, Big Time, por ejemplo, les voy a hacer un caso real de un juego actual. Para cerrar, un caso real de un juego actual, Big Time es un juego que está en tendencia, que es muy fuerte, que su moneda subió mucho, pero que planteó inicialmente un modelo sostenible y hoy por hoy generó un modelo de burbuja. Big Time, Agus, está formando una burbuja y lo está haciendo mediante su sistema de leaderboard. Lo que hacen es que vos estás invirtiendo para generar unos puntos que te dan más reward del que invertiste. O sea, invertís 10 para sacar 15, invertís 15 para sacar 30. Eventualmente se va a volver un modelo insostenible, un modelo completamente imposible de mantener. Entonces Big Time lamentablemente entró en un fenómeno de burbuja. Hay que ver si con el tiempo se corrige o no se corrige. Pero hoy por hoy Big Time, que es un juego en el cual yo invertí fuerte, les digo, invertí $100.000, invertí en Big Time y ya recuperé y ya gané. Ya recuperé y ya gané. Todos saben que yo soy un early investor de Big Time. En 2021 volé a New York para tener esta oportunidad de invertir debido a quienes eran los fundadores y me fue bien. Por eso les digo, me fue muy bien con esa inversión, ¿eh? Ya gané, ya recuperé, ya estoy en profit y sigo ganando todos los meses. Pero está en fenómeno de burbuja. Big Time va a caer. Salvo que corrijan, que den un timonazo. Pero hoy por hoy, lo que terminaron haciendo es un modelo en el cual vos jugando acumulas puntos. Para acumular estos puntos, vos tenés que gastar criptomoneda. Pero cuando termina este leaderboard, te van a pagar más criptomoneda de la que gastaste. Claramente, ahí estamos viendo que cómo me están pagando con emisión, no con demanda real. Entonces, si vos entendés ese modelo, empezás a ver cuándo llega a su punto de saturación y podés invertirle antes de que se caiga. Pero bueno, la verdad que no da para una charla de una hora, realmente tenía que meterme completamente y explicarles el paso a paso de qué está sucediendo ahí. Pero sí el fenómeno burbuja está llegando a Big Time. Por acá me plantean por qué Bitcoin perdió dos características. Miren, es muy simple por la escalabilidad. Se los voy a resumir para que se entienda bien. Bitcoin funciona metiendo transacciones dentro de su bloque. Es una cadena de bloques, ¿no? Es una blockchain, es una cadena de bloques. La cadena de bloques de Bitcoin tiene un tamaño máximo de 1 mega. Con un tamaño máximo de 1 mega vos podés tener 7 transacciones por segundo. Visa tiene 100.000. O sea, no podemos ni competir. O sea, no estamos, el orden de magnitud es 3 veces superior, 4. No hay punto de comparación. Entonces vean qué pasa. ¿Por qué limitaron el tamaño del bloque? Si el tamaño del bloque hubiese podido aumentar, hubiese evolucionado con todo el sistema monetario y no las hubiese perdido. Las perdió, Bitcoin las perdió. Entonces, ¿ahora qué pasa? Como entran poquitas transacciones 7 por segundo y el mundo tiene 8.000 millones de seres humanos, imagínense que a medida que va siendo adoptado, bueno, por segundo nada más 7 personas van a poder pasar su transacción. Y somos 8.000 millones. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para que pase la transacción? Es fácil, Bitcoin dice, ¿quién paga más? ¿Quién paga más? El que paga más entra. Entonces, imagínate comprarte un café pagando una comisión de $3. El café te sale 1, te sale medio. Es completamente inviable. Es inviable. Ahora, si vos permitías que escale el tamaño del bloque, sí podías llegar a este lugar en donde, bueno, no había que pagar más de fee. Bueno, metemos más. El bloque se ajusta a la demanda. Siempre que vos dejes que a la demanda libre, al mercado, a la demanda de la oferta libre va a funcionar. Si vos le pones un cap manual, deja de funcionar. Ahí viene el tema. Déjame un segundo que me están escribiendo. Ah, ok. Ya vamos terminando. Pero cuando le ponen esta restricción, les explico lo que pasa. Cortito para que me pregunte esto, quiero que este, el problema acá es que pierde esta facultad. Entonces, ¿qué pasó? Cuando pierde la facultad, ya no se puede porque es inviable, porque se hace muy caro, y cuanto más sube de precio, más caro es. Imagínense cuando Bitcoin valga 100 millones de dólares. La transacción te va a salir 10.000 dólares, 7.000 dólares. Es inviable. Sacaste a toda la clase media y baja de Bitcoin. O, ¿cómo lo utilizás? Desde un banco, desde una entidad centralizada, porque no pagás comisión. Acá viene el truco. Por ese motivo, Bitcoin hoy perdió la facultad 1 y la facultad 2. Le quedó la facultad 3, que es reserva de valor. Eso no lo va a perder, ¿eh? O sea, no estoy hablando mal de Bitcoin. Bitcoin va a subir mucho de precio, ahora más que antes, porque ahora es a favor de los bancos y no en contra. Ahora se bancarizó. Hay que entender, tengo un video explicando esto paso a paso, disculpen que no tengo el tiempo para entrar a detalle, pero esta restricción que le pusieron lo complejizó. Hicieron algo llamado capa 2 para solucionarlo, que es como, miren, como que la carretera de abajo está completamente colapsada de autos, ¿sí? Completamente colapsada de autos. Entonces, yo creo una autopista arriba que es mucho más rápida. Ahora, para entrar a esta autopista hay que pagar. Entonces ahí tiene otro problema, ¿sí? Pero así es como funciona hoy, digamos, ¿no? La avenida principal descentralizada, que es Bitcoin, está muy trabada. Hicieron una autopista arriba que va de puta madre, la verdad, va rapidísimo, pero bueno, tiene otro problemita, ¿no? Que hay un costo de entrada, un costo de salida, y aparte que digamos que tiene ahí un gestor que la maneja. Pero lo tengo que dejar por acá, chicos, no me quiero extender mucho más en este tema. La verdad que espero haber sido lo más claro posible en el tiempo que tuve. De todos modos, en mi canal de YouTube tengo esto explicado a detalle, todo lo que dije a detalle, puntualmente explicando todo. Espero que hayas disfrutado todo el curso también. Sé que esta es como la clase, no sé si 4, 5, 6, no sé qué clase es, pero ya han avanzado unas cuantas. Así que los dejo ahora con Matías, que es el siguiente expositor, y muchas gracias, chicos. Un abrazo.
Muchas gracias a vos, Manu, por esta impecable presentación. Bueno, chicos, espero que la hayan disfrutado. Y como bien dijo Manu, vamos ahora con la parte de Matías. Abrazo grande, Manu.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't speak as beautiful Spanish as Mano does, so I have to do it in English. But hope everybody can survive with that. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So share. 1 second, I gotta add something here. Enable. Yes, they changed it. I gotta restart Zoom. Sorry, guys. I didn't realize this. Somebody let me know when I come back.
Ahí vuelve, chicos. Tuvo algún tipo de inconveniente técnico.
Sí, tenía que reiniciar el Zoom ahí por lo que dijo. Ya vuelve a ingresar y
¿Sabés que
comenzamos.
la que tiré de Bitcoin que perdió esas dos cosas es polémica? Pero es verdad, pero es polémica. Es polémica.
Hay eh, quienes quizás se oponen a esa opinión, ¿no?
No, no, es que la perdió en serio, pero está buscado eso, porque ahora
All
lo,
right.
lo van a hacer subir de precio, pero ya lo dejamos a Mati.
Ahí
Sorry,
está,
guys.
perfecto, impecable.
All right. So I'm gonna share some to change some Mac permission thing. So apologize for that. So I'll try to speak slowly and clearly, but if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat in English, and I'll love to answer questions. But basically, I'm Matthias. I'm the CEO at Hole Punch. I'm also on Twitter under Martin Tosh and on GitHub and all the things, and you can check out all our stuff there. But I want to talk to you a little bit about peer-to-peer technology. From what I understood from my very basic understanding of Spanish, we talked a lot about Bitcoin just before and Web3 and decentralized tech. Peer-to-peer is a whole different beast in the same category of how to connect things directly with each other and do amazing things, and something very close to my heart. So basically, like I said, I'm the CEO at Hole Punch. We're a company where we're basically rebuilding the internet to be a peer-to-peer internet. So it's a very, very big goal. Basically re-engineering all the infrastructure that's out there today to work in a new way where things are very, very different and with a very different mindset. And at the core of our mission is basically this idea that instead of thinking about big tech and big companies owning all the internet and all your data and all your stuff online, it's all about users being able to own their own stuff and facilitate stuff they need to do online without having to give away all your stuff to big things. So it's basically like taking users like ourselves, like me, like you guys, and putting them back in the driver's seat and getting rid of all these big companies instead. So that's basically the core of our mission, and that's something that's very, very passionate for me and something I think is super important. And we'll cover three things today. Basically, we'll talk a little bit about how privacy works today and how it should work. We'll talk a bit about scalability, how you can build scalable networks. And we'll talk a little bit about just freedom, how you can own your stuff and do whatever you want. So I think that's pretty awesome. So let's dive in. So first of all, apologies, I have a cough, so I'll cough a lot, but hopefully it's okay. Let's talk a little bit about centralized systems. So basically, centralized systems is how, when you use a browser, everything works today. And it's actually, I like to call them legacy systems. So it's basically because it's how things work today, but it's also how it used to work in the past. And it's this data model of how everything used to work. But to kind of understand the future, we have to talk a little bit about the present and the past also to understand how we got here and where we're going. So centralized systems is all about servers and clients. This model of like you have people that do more, like a server, and you have clients that just talk to servers and do little stuff. That's a very classic centralized model. And that's how, again, the internet is structured today, and how finance is structured outside Bitcoin today, and how a lot of the world is organized, like clients and servers, people in power and people not in power, which is problematic. And if you think about visualizing it, kind of looks something like this, where if you see the computer emoji here, you'll have a server. That's your means of operation. You'll have a user here on the side. The user talks to the server. And mostly the server is giving them data and they're sending data back. And it's a very session between the user and the server. And if you have two users online, they'll both talk to the server. That's like why it's centralized. Everybody's going to the same central place. That's the idea. That's how again everything works today. You might have heard about data centers and things like that. That's just basically a place where you have tons of servers, but it's still very centralized. It's all in the same location, guarded. Nobody can come in. Things like that. That's the general model here. And in this model, users never talk to each other. So you don't have any communication that goes between users. It always goes to the server and goes back. Right now, we're talking through Zoom. Zoom is a classic centralized solution where we're all sending our video to Zoom, who probably records it and analyzes it and does all kinds of crazy stuff with it. But we're not talking to each other here on the call. That's just going through Zoom and down between everybody, which that's what we'll talk about, creates tons of problems. Good for business, potentially, for them, because they can get to withhold a ton of data. I'm sure somebody here is paying for a subscription to make this work, but, you know. So let's talk a little bit about privacy in these systems and sovereignty. Sovereignty is just a fancy word for owning your data. Like, how do you own your data in these systems? How do you generally deal with ownership, and can you own anything? So if you imagine like this scenario we had before with users all connected to the server, each user creates data. Everybody online creates data. I create data all the time. Right now, we're creating data on this call. That data, we're just in centralized systems, we're just giving to servers. Like I said before, we're sending this data to Zoom. If you write in a chat, I'm sure they're recording that because we're sending it all to the servers so they can spread it out. And we're kind of giving it away. We're saying, you know, this is our data, just take the data. So when you post something on Twitter, you're giving that data away. And a lot of these business models in existing centralized systems involve around taking that data, analyzing it, mining it, selling you ads, maybe just selling that data to somebody else, because that's the business model. That's why these systems, and when you use Facebook, tend to not cost anything, because that's how they make money. The more money they can make, the more profitable they are. That usually involves selling more data, analyzing the data more. The more they can analyze you, the less private you are, the better ads they can show you, the more stuff you buy. On third parties, maybe they just resell the data to somebody else who can do other stuff. So it's a very, very unprivate model, because that's the business model. And it's none of that is in your favor. You're not seeing any of that money. That's between the service and somebody else. That's why the stocks of tech companies on the stock exchange is very valuable, because there's a lot of money and data, but not us users don't see any of it. And in fact, we often just see, we often have to pay for it also, right? So it's kind of like I said here with Zoom, we probably also, somebody also is paying for Zoom for hosting this thing, and they're still collecting all the data and doing whatever they want with it. Maybe some services say they do less, but we don't really know. And also, there's no cryptographic guarantees or any of that, because they can do whatever they want. So that's a hugely problematic model. And I think this is a very interesting point in this. So we just had Manu, which I'm sure is a very knowledgeable guy, and I think he has a pretty big following on YouTube and Twitter. But both of those profiles are profiles in centralized economies and centralized services. And who actually, if you have a very, very famous profile on Twitter, who actually owns that profile, right? Because Twitter at any day could go in and say, we don't want that user anymore for some reason, and just turn it off. And if they just turn it off, you can't do anything, because it's like all your followers are there, all your data is there. You can't just take that data and go elsewhere. So do you actually own anything in that system? Like, do you actually own your own brand? Because you gave it away to them. It might be that they're sharing revenue with you. Like YouTube is good at doing that, but they always in the driving seat, just by being the service that centralizes the distribution of your stuff. So you're actually giving away tons of power from day one, which is, I think, especially in the future, is going to be very problematic, because if you don't align with their business models, you're going to be in trouble. YouTube already have tons of stuff where people upload videos that for some reason doesn't align with the algorithm, and videos get demonetized and people lose tons of money because YouTube just decides it, and tough luck. It's not like you can just move your stuff off YouTube and go somewhere else because you're in their ecosystem. So I think that's a very, very problematic thing, and something we should all think about way more. Security and reliability. So let's talk a little bit about also like security and reliability, and like, basically how often these systems are in centralized systems. But this is something we probably all heard about. Like, we all hear about data leaks all the time and security issues, and it's something that's very present in our day. But basically, in a centralized system, because it's centralized, if the centralized part gets compromised, like it gets taken over by somebody, then everybody dies, because it's a central point of distribution. So that basically means, like, if somebody hacks your website, they can distribute stuff through that website to somebody else, right? Because it's just one point. If somebody hacks, for some reason, Twitter, it's not like your tweets going on Twitter are somehow verifiable that they came from you. Somebody can just edit that and put something else there, because there's no cryptographically verifiable thing. It's just a Twitter database saying things. So even though they might have like different things spread out here, it's all very, very centralized. And we hear about that all the time, where people lose access to an Instagram account and they get hacked and whatever because somebody cracks their password, because it's all in one place. So it's very, very attractive for hackers to try to go in one place and get tons of data. And it's all very, very weak security, because it's not built in from the beginning. And there's, this is something that's just going to get worse in our time as time passes, because the systems are getting bigger. We have more and more value in these systems, like we just talked about with data, and also just with banking and stuff. Like, it's going to be more and more attractive to try to attack these systems, because again, the payoffs are getting bigger and bigger, and with centralized things, there's just a lot of, you just have to target your effort in a few places to get a big payoff. So that's also very problematic. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about scalability. So scalability just means, if you have a service that's very popular for some reason and it's centralized, you'll spin up an instance, and you have a couple of instances running that service. And as users join your service, that service, has to share the compute with everybody, or share the resources with everybody. And the more popular it gets, the more strained it gets, because it's all going to a centralized location. So at some point, it's just going to be overwhelmed and blow up. So these systems just don't scale very well. And the way we scale them today is, we just, instead of having one instance, we have two instances, and then we get twice. And then instead of having two instances, maybe we have four instances, we get double again. But every time we do that, we have to pay more. And every time we do that, we have to make more data centers and centralize more. So that's inherently very expensive. It's very complex. And it's not something that's built into the systems today. So that's also like a very big downside of centralized systems in that way. And it kind of like all these three things, security, privacy, scalability, they all tie together, because it's all like, some people would say it's a feature, because it's a good way to make a business that's very guarded, where you can keep a lot of control. But me, as a person that's very into peer-to-peer, would say that's obviously a bug, because it's just about control and technology. We can do much better with modern technology. And especially comes down to this for me, because if you look at a network like this one, right, where if you have a service where a lot of people are talking to your service. There's so much compute in this network. There's so many computers in this network, right? There's like the server, obviously, but then look at everybody accessing it. We all have, I have an iPhone, and this phone has more power than my computer now, I think, computing power, because it's a powerful device. Some people have like smartwatches, they're powerful. I probably have another phone down in my cabinet, and I have an old computer somewhere. We have so many devices with so much compute, and 99% of the time it's doing nothing. Right now, my phone is just sitting here doing nothing. I'm using the computer right now to do Zoom, but it still probably has more compute. All my other computers are not doing anything. So like most of our times, all our devices as consumers are just doing nothing because we're not using them. We're doing something else. So it's probably like if you did a graph of like the wasted amount of compute, it's like an all-time high every year because we're just getting more devices that are more powerful that we're actually using less because we're very focused with our times. I think that's really, really problematic. And I think that also ties into like how do we get to this point in history? Why did we make all these very, very centralized solutions like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, but all these issues that I just talked about? It's basically because compute used to not be everywhere. Like if you were in the 1970s or even the early 2000s, computers were very expensive. There was very few of them. Most people didn't have laptops. We definitely didn't have smartphones. So we basically designed all these networks around these principles that compute is very expensive. Very few people have powerful computers. Very few people had powerful internet connections. Now we have very decent internet connections in most places of the world, and even in the places where we don't. Even if you go to a very poor country, they still have smartphones with lots of compute that is not doing things most of the time in most places. So it's because we did this paradigm shift where we went from a world that was very, very weak on compute, and we took the ideas from that and we built the internet of today with those ideas. But actually, all that stuff is invalidated now because we have it's like a whole different world, obviously. Sorry. So I think that's it's pretty sad to think about in a way. That's why I work in peer-to-peer. So what's the solution to all this terribleness? It's obviously peer-to-peer. So peer-to-peer, if you don't know about peer-to-peer, you probably used like BitTorrent in the past. Maybe you heard about that. Tool for downloading movies was very popular when I was younger. Tons of other things, but it's basically just a way to connect people directly and make protocols where people talk to each other directly between computers, just computer to computer, peer to peer, mano y mano, and exchange the information directly without having to go through servers, and it's just between peers with a ton of protocols that makes it very secure and very flexible and very scalable. And let's talk a little bit about how those things work. So a typical peer-to-peer network looks like this. There's no servers because everybody is a peer. A peer just means somebody in the network. There's nothing special about anybody. It's not like we're all connecting to somebody. We're just connecting to each other. We don't have to all connect to everybody. Here, everybody's connected to everybody, but we can have networks where there's just paths between each other. Kind of like real life, You guys are probably a lot in the same place in Argentina. I'm in Switzerland, so you're closer to each other with like networks, but then we have a bridge to each other here through Zoom right now. So that's like a classic network. But networks where nobody is special, and we use powerful cryptographic protocols to talk directly to each other and be able to verify the data we send between each other and make scalable networks like that. So that's really, really a simple model. You just pull away the server and you got it. So, sorry. So let's go through the three principles we had before about privacy, etc., and see how they apply to peer-to-peer and how different that is. So basically, in a peer-to-peer network, you also, you have data. Like, you can have a peer-to-peer social network where you have tons of data you're chatting with. But instead of taking all the data and giving it away to servers, you're just keeping the data and you're just choosing who to share it with. So at Whole Bunch, we make a chat app called Keat. That's a peer-to-peer chat app, which is also a little bit like a social network where you can write stuff. And it's peer-to-peer. So all the stuff I write, the only people who get access to my data, because it's just on my computer in my Keat rooms, is the people I add to my room and I choose to share with. And it's all my data. It's signed by my cryptographic key pairs, my cryptography. Other people can verify that it came from me, but it's always has a trail back to me as my data. Other people can choose to mirror it if I give them access to it, which just helps me host my data. But I never just taking my stuff and just raw giving it away to another entity and giving them a license to that. It's my data signed by me and my data structures, and other people can choose to view it if I give them access to it. That's a huge difference to centralized systems where you're taking all the data and you bring it in one place. Here it's just every peer has their data, and you kind of architecture the networks around that. And it's one of those models that makes a lot of sense also when you think about it, just from how human networks work. Like, it's not like when you have friends, some friends you tell a lot of stuff to, like everything you're doing. Certain jokes you only tell to some people because they get them closer. I'm sure you have some very internal Argentine jokes that I wouldn't get because that's very close to your context, and I have some very Swiss Danish jokes that you guys wouldn't get because it's close to my context. And that's how you like form these networks that make more sense. So like instead of having one big network, you have a lot of small networks. And I think that's really powerful. That's something we're thinking about a lot. And then with the ability to retain your privacy, because again, you can just have networks with your family where you share tons of data, and you can have networks with your coworkers where you share less data but still a lot, and then you can have networks where you talk to strangers where you just share like a little bit of your data. You're in control, and that's all that matters. Oh, sorry. And the cool thing about these networks is that if you have some data, for example, like you're very popular content creator doing something, and you don't think you're getting a good enough deal or whatever, you're not getting enough traction sharing your data with the people you want and the app you're using, like some social network, then because the data is decoupled from these centralized servers, sure data, and these data formats, peer-to-peer data formats you can share with anybody, you can just take your profile and your data and you can move elsewhere. So if somebody comes along and gives you a better offer, being like, hey, move your content off this app and move to this other app, you can just do it. It's just like as simple as just saying, yeah, cool. If that app is compatible with my data formats, which is these open formats, then it just works. So like nobody can ever take your data hostage and lock you in, which is really, really, really important for sovereignty and being in control of your own stuff. So that's obviously really important and super powerful. And that's one of the things I like the most about peer-to-peer, because again, it just shows you that it's about taking the user and putting them in front, and not companies hosting your data, because they should just, they can make money doing various things with hosting your data. That's fine, should be okay, but they shouldn't take you hostage. Like the market is always better because this way you can get the best deal for your stuff. And maybe then there should be more focused platforms for different problems. Like maybe there's a social network that's really good for jokes. Maybe there's a social network that's really good for food recipes. Maybe there's one for Argentina. They can all be the same app and with different skins and stuff like that. But because the data is very, very flexible and you can take it with you, you can just move to the one that makes sense, which I'm very excited about myself. I think that's very good. So let's talk a little bit about security in these networks. So basically, the cool thing about a peer-to-peer network also is that you don't have all the data in one place. You have a ton of data spread out between the various people, again, with the users in control of what they're putting in the different places. So if somebody gets compromised in a peer-to-peer network, for example, they start saying invalid data, or somebody steals the computer or whatever, it's fine because it's just one peer. So the rest of the network just stays up. Doesn't matter. And again, if you look at BitTorrent, the file share network, that has some really interesting real life experience with this kind of stuff, where when BitTorrent, when I was younger and I used to work on BitTorrent, when that was at the biggest, I think the networks where data was flowing around, the DHT, the BitTorrent DHT, when that was at the biggest, it had around 30 million computers, I think. 30 million computers. So it's a network with 30 million active computers routing data. And basically that meant that if you wanted to kill BitTorrent, and a lot of people wanted to kill BitTorrent because it was sharing movies, and Hollywood didn't like sharing movies. So they're like, could you just shut it down? That'd be easy if you could shut it down. If it's a centralized system, you could just pick up the phone and you can call whoever is hosting that server and say, hey, please shut that down because that's illegal. Now they wanted to shut down BitTorrent. But that meant that they would have to go around killing 30 million computers around the world. So unrealistic, right? Because every time they kill one, probably somebody else came along. So they quickly realized they couldn't. And this was like a case study where you have a decentralized network that nobody put any money into, that Hollywood wanted to kill, tons of money, that governments wanted to kill with tons of money. And they couldn't because technology was too strong. It was unstoppable, unkillable. So that's basically what you get from structuring your things as peer-to-peer from the beginning. You can make these networks that is just, as they grow, it's like whack-a-mole. You can't kill them because a new one pops up. That's super, super important. And there's no reason why you shouldn't take that principle and put that into any technology you build today. Because it doesn't really cost you anything on the application level. It's a very, very powerful foundation. So I think that's very, very important to think about. And finally, another thing that's really cool about this network is scalability. So scalability in a peer-to-peer network is very natural. So basically, this is the most boring peer-to-peer network. If you have a peer-to-peer network that just has one person in it, then it's a very boring network because it's just like it's one person, but it still works. Like I can have a chat room with myself on Keep, and I can sit there and chat. That's a peer-to-peer network with myself. But then as you add people, again, you don't have to make a network where everybody's connecting with each other, because here there's like 3 people in this network and they can all get to each other through a path, and that's the only thing that really matters. But you're not really reducing the capacity of each person that much by adding people. So here now, this person in the middle is connected to 2 other people, but that's like probably not that bad resource-wise because they have a computer and stuff. And then you add some more people. Again, you can see like now I added 2 people to this network here, but the person in the middle didn't really get affected because they're just adding at the peripheral. But data can still spread through this network, just adds a little bit of latency, and they can keep growing like this. So it's kind of like I said, like a real person network where you grow them up. And with very few resources on each computer, they amplify very intensely. And that's also like just going back to thinking about BitTorrent a little bit. That's also what happened there, where you can share tons and tons and tons of data for these networks because everybody is helping the network. And if you think about the combined bandwidth, for example, in a network like this, like internet connections and network like this, it's massive because most people have at their homes pretty powerful internet connections. Even if you're on something where you're like, oh, this is not that fast internet, you're usually not using all of it at once unless you're watching Netflix. So there's so much you can put to the network if you wanted to. And it's not usually, in most places, it doesn't cost you anything because you pay a flat fee every month, no matter what you do, right? And when you add all those crumbs up from everybody, that's a gargantuan amount of bandwidth that you can use for tons of stuff. Sorry. So let's take the time here. So these networks are very different, very, very powerful, and allows you to do all kinds of new things. So by building things peer-to-peer, you get these new paradigms, and with these new paradigms, you get new capabilities, and you have to rewire your brain to think in a whole different way. So for example, this is interesting, I think, like, if you travel a lot or you're just in places with spotty connections, I just travel a lot over Christmas to a lot of places that had a lot of bad connectivity. I was noticing when I talked to some of my team members on Slack, it was just very bad because the internet was off and off, and the app would just be semi-unresponsive. That's because it's not meant to be offline. It's meant, it wants to talk to a server to give its data to. When you make peer-to-peer apps, there's no such thing at online and offline because there's no point of reference on that. It's all relative, right? So an offline peer-to-peer network just means a peer-to-peer network with one peer. It's not, again, not the most interesting network, but it's just one peer. When you add more peers, the network gets less offline, but you can still have a peer-to-peer network with no internet where we're all in a building and we're just communicating on the local LAN network. That's still a valid peer-to-peer network. You can also have one where we're talking through satellites in space or whatever. So like this idea of connectivity matters much less because all the protocols in a peer-to-peer network are engineered to work in a way where connectivity doesn't matter. So it's all about making data structures where the data for a little bit is stored on your device. And then as other peers come along, that data can leave your device and go to other people, but you never assume that they're there like you do with a centralized app. So like I said, when I was traveling, centralized apps were pretty spotty because I actually had a little bit of internet on my phone when I was traveling, and most apps work even worse with that because then they think they can talk to servers, but they can't. And then when I use the peer-to-peer apps that I have on my phone, like there's zero difference in the experience using it on a terrible network than I is at home when I text now, because again, all the data just gets added to the phone, and then when the data can leave the device, it leaves the device. But me as a user don't need to care about it. And I think that's super, super important. That's where you need to rethink how applications work in general. This idea of being offline and online doesn't really matter. And I think that's especially interesting when we live in faraway places. Like I remember I spent a year in Argentina. And Argentina is a very interesting place for internet, I think, because it's very far away from where most things are, because it's very south on the globe. And a lot of data centers are in the US, and a lot of data centers are in Europe. Now there's a little bit more spread out, but like it's very clustered in these places. So you can really, I remember being in Argentina, I could really feel the latency, like how far away things were when you work with services online. But peer-to-peer doesn't matter, because in peer-to-peer, you just talk to your neighbor, right? So if you're sending a message on a peer-to-peer network and the other person is sitting next to you, if you do that on WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever, all that data is going from your device all the way to a server somewhere, if you're online, probably in the US, and then coming back to the person next to you. So it's traveling so far, that data. If you're on a peer-to-peer network, you're probably just connected to the other person, so the data just like over there, or like to the router, obviously, but very close to each other. So it doesn't matter that it's very far away from where most of the infrastructure is, because you cut away the middleman and things appear fast. So obviously, if you're talking to somebody in Argentina and talking to somebody in Europe, that's very far away, and there's like speed of light, and nobody's going to solve that. But if you're talking to somebody close, it's fast. So it's very natural in that way, and I think that's where you need to rethink your thinking a lot. That's very cool, and it actually matters a lot. So, for example, things like if you have a video call like we have right now, if we're talking to each other in real time, like we're having a conversation, things like latency matters a lot. Like how long does it take for me saying a word to you hearing the word? Because it has to travel. Now, if you're in a faraway place and has to go to a data center and come back, that takes time because the speed of light is not that fast actually when it comes down to it. So data leaving and coming back, it quickly takes some milliseconds. And it really quickly becomes really hard to speak because the latency is too high, even though the other person might be in the same office as you. So with a peer-to-peer solution, because of the connectivity stuff, it flows more naturally because the data has to flow fewer places, and it's usually also cheaper because the internet provider doesn't have to send it so far. And I'm sure it's also better for the globe because it uses less energy and stuff. So that's very, very powerful and something you have to think about a lot. This is one of the other things I really love about peer-to-peer. And this is like, we talked a little bit about that with BitTorrent, but basically there's no downtime in peer-to-peer networks because there is no uptime. Like it's a paradigm that doesn't make any sense. So if the only thing you need to use a peer-to-peer network is your device, then as long as you have your device, it's up. Like there's no, can't go down. Really simple, right? So it never gets in the way of you doing your thing. You just always open it up. You do your thing. It might mean that you're not connected to all the people you need to be connected to. That's a different thing. But I can always open up, key and write a message and then shut it down. Doesn't matter if I'm offline or whatever I'm doing. And doesn't matter if like all the data centers are gone because all I need is my device. That's a very, very powerful thing. And that's something I think about a lot, especially in the world today where there's a lot of instability. So let's say there was a big issue at a data center, which was not that, I think it was like last week, WhatsApp went down, or was it 2 weeks ago? That can never happen to a peer-to-peer system because you just have your own device. So that's really worth thinking about a lot. And one of the things we say at Hole Punch, our peer-to-peer company, is that even if we go out of business and we lose our funding and everybody gets fired or whatever, the app still works because the app is peer-to-peer. The app doesn't require any services. It doesn't require any funding being put into a service. It doesn't require any operations other than people developing it. Obviously, that's important, but doesn't no ongoing thing. So that's super important also for users for like the longevity of a project and making sure that it always works. So you don't need to put ads in your app and to fund it and stuff like that because there's no cost involved in these things. So that's very, very important. And this one is really cool also. So this one I enjoy a lot. It's like a little bit similar to the BitTorrent thing, but basically peer-to-peer apps, there is no limits also. Like well, by limits, I mean, every time you use an app, there's always these arbitrary things that the apps do to limit you from using the app. So if you use Zoom, the app we're using now, without subscription, at least when I used the last, you could only have a meeting that lasted 40 minutes, I think, with X amount of people because they don't want you to use it. They want you to pay for it, use it more because it costs them money for you to use the app. In a peer-to-peer app, nobody's paying for anything because it's just between you and the peers. So there's no limits. You can do whatever you want. So this is the classic example, just that illustrates it really well. But try any app, like Slack or email or whatever. I had to send this presentation to the organizers of this talk earlier today, and the presentation was 300 megabytes, and it was impossible to send on email because the limits is like 20 megabytes. If you wanted to send a 2 terabyte file to anybody for any service, any online service, what would happen is they would all say, you can't do it. Sorry, you can't do it. We have a max, it's like 50 megabytes. Otherwise, you have to pay money and sign up and set a monthly fee, and every month you have to pay because it's there and blah, blah, blah. It's because it costs them money to do it. Like they have to store that. Storing data is definitely not free, and they cost them money every month for a provider or a disk that has to be powered on and things like that. And that's really ridiculous if you think about it, because if I have a 2 terabyte disk on my computer, why do I care if they can afford it or not? I can afford it. I paid for this computer. I bought it once. Why should I buy it again? If you have enough data to store it, the person I'm sending it to, why should we care, right? So what's the solution here? The solution is we just cut out the middleman and we just send it to each other. So then the only limit is my computer and the other person's computer, and how fast can we transfer it? That's a very simple thing. We're already paying for all that stuff anyway, and it's not like this is a magic solution that makes it cheaper than putting it on a server somewhere. It's just because we already paid for the hardware and we're already paying for this internet, and we don't have to pay again one more time again to do it. So when I had to send this presentation to the organizers, we just sent it through Keat, the peer-to-peer app, because I just dropped it in there, boom, done, moved on. Simple as that, because peer-to-peer. So I think that's really, really interesting to think about. We noticed that a lot also just doing, we do video calls in our app also, peer-to-peer again. And we just noticed how much better the quality is in our app compared to other apps, because we don't limit the quality going through, because we're like, just send us good quality as the network can support. Why not? So if I'm at home, I have 5G at home, I think, like a 5G connection. You can easily send like 4K video through that today. So I'm sending 4K video when I'm on a call on Keat, and then you can see all my wrinkles and stuff. Because why not? And then when you use like something like Google Meet or something, because again, they have to pay for it, they reduce the quality, makes it, it might look okay, but once you've seen it, it's ultra crisp HD, it looks really terrible, because they want to reduce the cost. And in the P2P networks, there is no cost. So that's very nice. And that's actually very surprisingly hard to start thinking about that model once you get used to it. So that's super exciting. And tons more things. There's so much more stuff that peer-to-peer unlocks in this paradigm that is worth thinking about. Things like ultra private features, like I said, that you can be super private and still interact with apps, that you can make apps that just for you, for backing up your data. I think in this age of AI, peer-to-peer is more important than ever, because you want to be able to run these very, very personalized AI systems on your computer with your data, instead of giving all the data away to yet another centralized provider that's going to take all your data, mine it to death, and sell it to somebody else. So many, many things to think about here. And like I said, that's why we built Keat. You should check it out. It's a very fun little chat app that's very powerful, fully peer-to-peer, works on mobile phones, works on the computer. And it's, I think it's a very good showcase of what you can actually do with peer-to-peer technology. And we use that every day. And let me just run you quickly through. If you want to build this stuff yourself, we don't have to get into depth about this, but basically you need a networking stack, you need discovery, you need data structures. We have all that stuff on our GitHub. If you want to check it out, I'll put the link in the chat after, but it's just github.com/holepunch2. We have components for everything. We have a networking stack. It's really amazing, that allows you to connect computers directly, no matter if you have internet providers or firewalls. We break through all that stuff with some very fun, powerful technology that allows you to just talk together easily on any network, basically, and tons more. And we have data structures for doing peer-to-peer databases, file sharing, you name it. So really, really, really powerful stuff. So sorry to just skip through this. Short on time. You should check that out. We recently launched also our peer-to-peer runtime, the Pair runtime. If you go to pairs.com, PEARS.com, you can read more about that. That's how you can install it on your computer, and you can start developing things really easily, or run other people's apps. No tokens. There's no like coin or shit token attached to it. It's just peer-to-peer technology. We give it away for free for you to make stuff, because we want people to build really powerful tools. And that's the only reason why we can do that is because it doesn't cost us anything. We're not running anything. It's just software you can run if you want to. And if you're more interested in peer-to-peer technology, here's some cool peer-to-peer projects I think you should look at to get started with. So basically, obviously, Bitcoin is a very, very good example. It's a more in the peer-to-peer world, more federated, centralized system in that way, like network-wise, because it's a lot of few computers doing a lot of compute. Still very, very decentralized, obviously, in terms of like there's nobody in charge, but it's not something you run on your computer necessarily, because it requires very specialized hardware today and stuff like that. But that's a very interesting project. Blockchain in general is very interesting. You should look into that. Obviously, you are, because you're on this course, but and also think about how that's not a solution for everything. I think that's a mistake people think about a lot. Blockchain technology is very good for financial things, but it's not a very good chat app, for example. That's where you want to do more specialized peer-to-peer things. So definitely check that. Then I would definitely look into BitTorrent. That's a very easy way to understand a lot of peer-to-peer. That's how I got started myself 15 years ago. Very, very simple protocol. That's obviously good at sharing files. But it's easy to understand if you're interested in that kind of nerdiness. And still around today, less used today than it used to be. But again, it's actually a really simple protocol, and it's very, very powerful. And then Hypercore, that's the protocol we're developing, which is kind of like a BitTorrent 2.0. Kind of like saying, if you have BitTorrent and that was good for sharing files, what if you took those ideas and you just make them work with anything, like streams, live data streams, any kind of data instead of just files, any kind of live data that's updating rapidly. And we build a peer-to-peer data structure on that called Hypercore. Again, put that into Google, you'll probably find some links, but that's our flagship, and it's very easy to get started with, and very, very powerful. And that's all I had. So I hope you learned some stuff. I didn't get to read the chat because I don't know how to do that while I'm doing the presentation, but that's my peer-to-peer nonsense for today. And again, check out pairs.com. We have a ton of stuff. Check out Keat. We have rooms on Keat where we talk about this stuff all the time. We actually have a ton of Argentinians in there already because Argentina is a big peer-to-peer country and always is. So I would encourage you to get involved. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for your presentation.
Yeah,
It's a
no worries.
pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hope you learned anything. Hope you learned something and enjoy the rest of your course.